Right now, as I write this, there's a woman asleep upstairs who legally became my wife in less time than it takes most people to plan a first date. My name is Andrew Collins. I'm 34, and to understand how Lily Harper ended up in my life, we need to rewind 3 months, back to an attorney's office in Denver, Colorado, where I first heard the phrase that would define the worst and best day of my life. No wife, no lodge. That was the blunt reality my late Uncle Frank had written into his will, a final condition demanding I be legally married within 24 hours or watch the mountain lodge that raised me pass permanently to my cousin Victor, a man already circling the property like it was inventory rather than family. Frank built that lodge with his own hands, log by log, back when he was younger than I am now, and every summer of my childhood I woke up there to the sound of an axe splitting firewood before sunrise and the smell of pine sap drifting through a screen door that never fully closed. I assumed it would simply become mine one day. I never imagined I'd have less than a day to earn it. Frank used to say a house wasn't really a home until it had been filled with people who had nowhere else to go on a holiday. And he made a habit throughout my entire childhood of inviting stray neighbors and distant relatives, and even the occasional lost hiker to sit at his table like they'd always belonged there. I hadn't thought about that memory in years until I sat across from that attorney and felt a strange, sinking realization settle over me that Frank's final condition probably had very little to do with marriage as an institution and everything to do with forcing me to open my life to someone else the way he'd spent his entire life opening his door to strangers. I spent the first several hours after that meeting doing everything except accepting reality, calling old contacts who hung up mid-sentence, reopening dating apps I'd deleted a year earlier, staring at a countdown clock on my phone like it might negotiate with me. By early evening, defeated, I was slouched in a cafe booth 2 blocks from my office, confessing the entire situation to my business partner in a voice loud enough that a woman at the next table laughed out loud before I even noticed she existed. Her name was Lily Harper, a school teacher grading a stack of essays with a red pen gripped like a weapon, and when I turned toward her, embarrassed, she asked whether I was joking or genuinely needed a wife by the following afternoon. I told her everything, and instead of leaving, she leaned forward and started asking sharp, specific questions, the kind that made it clear she wasn't entertained. She was actually evaluating the man sitting across from her. 2 hours passed before either of us noticed the cafe closing around us. At some point, I repeated myself quieter this time. I need a wife by tomorrow. Lily reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper, its edges worn soft from being opened and closed more than once. Promise me these things first, she said, sliding it across the table, and I understood immediately that whatever was written there mattered more to her than the marriage itself. 5 conditions stared back at me when I unfolded it. Honesty, even when inconvenient. Respect, the kind that survives long after any audience disappears. Patience, especially on days patience feels impossible. Genuine presence, not just a name on a legal document. And a promise to always make room for people who needed help, regardless of how demanding my life became. I signed it that night, 18 hours before the deadline, handshaking, some part of me already sensing this piece of paper was going to matter more than the inheritance driving the whole arrangement. We married the next morning in a rushed courthouse ceremony, 40 minutes before the deadline expired, and I called the family attorney from the courthouse steps to confirm Victor's claim had officially disappeared. I thought that phone call ended the conflict. It only escalated it. 3 weeks later, a lawyer I'd never heard of called at 6 in the morning, informing me that Victor intended to contest the marriage as fraudulent, a transparent scheme designed to dodge the will's actual intent. For nearly a month, I lived with the very real possibility that everything, the lodge and the marriage protecting it, could unravel in a courtroom. Lily never once suggested walking away, even though she had every right to. She sat beside me through every legal call, every late night poring over documents at our kitchen table, steady in a way I didn't yet know how to be steady myself. When Victor finally showed up uninvited at the lodge, standing on the porch in an expensive coat that looked absurd against the pine trees, he looked at Lily like she was a prop I'd rented for the occasion and asked flatly how much I was paying her. Lily didn't raise her voice. She told him some things in this family clearly skipped straight past him, folded her arms, and said she wasn't going anywhere, not because of a will, but because she'd chosen to be there. Victor's case collapsed 2 weeks later, once his own lawyer found nothing fraudulent to uncover, only 2 people who had built something unexpectedly real out of a legal technicality. I remember watching her on those steps, completely unshaken, and realizing that whatever this arrangement had started as, it had already become something else entirely, even though neither of us had said so out loud. In the months that followed, without either of us discussing it directly, Lily started holding me to that folded list like it was scripture, rather than a favor. She had me at school fundraisers within weeks, funding classroom supplies within a month, and by winter I was showing up most Tuesday and Thursday evenings to a school gymnasium, helping kids with homework while their parents worked late shifts across town. I stopped treating those evenings as an obligation almost immediately. They became the part of my week I looked forward to most, more than any client dinner or closed deal had ever managed to be. We laughed constantly during those months, teased each other mercilessly, built a rhythm that felt less like an arrangement and more like an actual life neither of us had planned but both of us seemed to need. There's one particular Thursday I still think about often. A girl named Priya, maybe 10 years old, sat in the corner of that gymnasium, refusing to hand in a short story she'd written for an assignment, convinced it was terrible before anyone had even read it. Lily was busy across the room helping another student, so I sat down beside Priya and asked if she'd read it to me instead, quietly, just the two of us. It wasn't terrible. It was sharp and strange and funny in a way that surprised me, and by the time she finished reading, half the room had gone quiet, listening in. Lily caught my eye from across the gym that night with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, something between pride and disbelief, like she was watching the fifth promise on that folded piece of paper actually come to life in front of her. Later that week she told me, only half joking, that I was keeping that particular condition better than any of the other four. Around the same time, Victor made one final attempt to unravel things, sending his lawyer to question a minor technicality in our courthouse paperwork, hoping to find some loophole buried in the timing of our signatures. Lily sat beside me through that call too, unbothered, and when the lawyer's search turned up nothing except two people who had clearly built a real life together, Victor withdrew for good and neither of us heard from him again. I remember exhaling for what felt like the first time in weeks, looking across the table at Lily surrounded by legal paperwork, realizing the fight to save the lodge had quietly become secondary to a different fight, the one about whether either of us was brave enough to admit none of this felt temporary anymore. Then came the evening everything nearly fell apart for the second time. I drove up to the lodge alone to sort paperwork with the property manager, and when I returned that night, Lily's bag sat packed by the front door. She told me calmly that since the will's condition had long been satisfied and neither of us had promised anything beyond that, she thought it fair to let me return to my old life before this got harder to walk away from than it already was. I stood there holding my car keys, feeling something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with mountains or paperwork. I asked for 1 hour. I drove her back up to that same porch where Frank used to leave a second mug of coffee out every morning, waiting for someone who never seemed to arrive. I took her hands in mine and told her the truth, the whole truth, exactly the way she'd asked me to promise months earlier in a cafe booth. I told her I'd kept 4 of her 5 promises without much effort because loving her had made them easy, and I was terrified of breaking the 5th one, the unspoken one neither of us had ever written down. No wife, no lodge, that's how this started, I told her, my voice breaking in a way I rarely allow it to. But somewhere between that fundraiser and Victor's lawyer and every Tuesday in that gymnasium, you became the reason I actually want to keep any of it. Lily didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the mountains, then back at my face, tears sliding down before she tried to stop them. I only wrote that list because I was terrified of loving someone who'd disappear the moment it got difficult, she finally whispered. I never expected the man who needed a wife by tomorrow to become the one I couldn't picture any tomorrow without. So that's how you end up, 3 months later, writing at a kitchen table while the woman upstairs, the one who handed you a folded piece of paper in a cafe booth on the worst day of your life, sleeps soundly in a home Frank built with his own hands, a home that very nearly slipped away and very nearly stayed empty, if not for one impossible, infuriating, perfect condition buried in an old man's will. Priya still sends Lily her short stories every few months, and last week she mailed one addressed to both of us. Dedicated in careful 10-year-old handwriting, to Mr. and Mrs. Collins, who taught me my story wasn't terrible after all. I keep it folded in my desk drawer now, right next to the copy of that original list of promises. 2 pieces of paper, both a little worn now, both worth infinitely more, in the end, than any will could have ever spelled out on its own. So that's how you end up, 3 months later, writing at a kitchen table while the woman upstairs, the one who handed you a folded piece of paper in a cafe booth on the worst day of your life, sleeps soundly in a home Frank built with his own hands, a home that very nearly slipped away and very nearly stayed empty, if not for one impossible, infuriating, perfect condition buried in an old man's will. Priya still sends Lily her short stories every few months, and last week she mailed one addressed to both of us. Dedicated in careful 10-year-old handwriting, to Mr. and Mrs. Collins, who taught me my story wasn't terrible after all. I keep it folded in my desk drawer now, right next to the copy of that original list of promises. 2 pieces of paper, both a little worn now, both worth infinitely more, in the end, than any will could have ever spelled out on its own.